Hello, BookTube. I thought we'd do another episode of my library tour. I'm doing a library tour of all of my books in 2022, and I'm taking a detour in that library tour to look at books that I owned once upon a time and don't own anymore, the Library of the Lost. I thought we'd do another one of those. We'll keep doing those until I can make a little more sense of where I want to go next in the actual off-the-shelf library tour. And we'll start with an old green spine mass market Penguin crime classic that of a type that I now buy all the time. I don't think when I first got this thing I was. I think it just intrigued me, but I don't remember anything about it, so I don't know if I read it and it just fell flat. It's by James Byram, and it's called Take Only as Directed. Just a murder mystery. I think it involves a doctor from Harley Street, a doctor who gets ensnared in a plot. Hence, that Take Only as Directed used to be a variation of that used to be on pharmacy labels. I don't know if it still is, but I believe that the main character here is a doctor, but I don't know if I read his adventure. I might have only read that on the back cover. Okay, this next one is a YA classic. It's by Scott Odell. And it's called The Hawk That Dare Not Hunt by Day. And it has, main characters, and they have adventures. It's a historical novel, as you can tell. But the main gist of the book here is the ongoing struggle to smuggle into England Bibles printed in English, so that people could read the Bible. That was a deadly trade. You could be tortured to death or killed. Your whole family could be disappropriated. The most famous exponent of that Bible in English had to live as an exile and was eventually found and executed. And this is very intriguing in the way that old-style YA novels used to be, which is that they give you a ringside seat to that kind of history. A history that I don't know how many people today are really up on how dangerous it once was to read the Bible. It was people when, for instance, Banned Books Month comes and goes. It is the number one most deadly banned book in history. Not at present, but once upon a time. Once upon a time, if you were, a very minor city official, a yeoman of some kind or other in some British town, some English town, in the reign of King Henry VIII, for instance, if you got drunk at a tavern and said, "I'm not sure that the king is capable of siring a son, physically, I don't think he's capable of doing that," well, the room will go quiet, and you might get arrested. You might get hauled before some sort of tribunal. You might be punished. You might be branded on your ear or your forehead. But it wasn't completely certain that you would be killed if you did that. But if you were caught with a Bible, if you were caught reading the Bible in English, not through the mediary of a priest, not because you, of course, didn't know Latin. If you were reading the Bible in English, you were dead for sure. You were dead for sure, and a horrifying death. A fascinating look at that time period that you also get, for instance, all through the first of Hilary Mantel's Thomas Cromwell books, Wolf Hall. It's very prevalent there. Then this next one is by an author. I'm going to call him Richard Kapuscinski. I'm pretty sure I'm not polishing that up enough. But this is his great book, Shah of Shahs, about the last Shah of Iran. It's a fairly brief biographical study. It's a look also at how the Shah presented himself and the grounds of his infamous relationships with Western leaders. So you might not think that I would love it because it's way too short to be the kind of biography that I like, and a little too topical to ward off dating. But there's a reason why Penguin put this in their modern classics, and this is high on a lot of other people's lists too. It's had many, many editions. It's just a great book. It's just a fantastic little book on the Shah, yes, on turbulent politics, also on the deals you have to broker with the much more powerful Western countries, even if they don't like you, even if you don't like them. It's hard to describe, but it will stick with you. It's worth the renown that it has had over the years. Oddly enough, I don't have a copy. I don't have a copy of it in any form. Don't have an ebook of it. This next one is a novel. There's a long provenance, the long origin story to this novel. If you were to go back to the time, this would have been in the 1980s, I think. If you were to go back to the time and read, for instance, the contemporary book reviews of this book, they spent a lot of time on the provenance, not so much time on the book. The book itself is fairly light going. This is The Temple by Stephen Spender. And this is a very lightly altered autobiographical novel about being a beautiful boy at Oxbridge, being a beautiful boy with Auden and Christopher Isherwood. And there are parts of it that are ecstatically beautiful. No doubt about that. I'm not selling it short. It is a very good reading experience, but it doesn't have much more to do than that, than just sort of gauzy remembrance type novel, which you might say, well, aren't you a huge fan of Brideshead Revisited? And isn't the first part of Brideshead Revisited exactly the book that you just described? It is, but Brideshead gets more jagged and wiser as it moves on. It doesn't stay in the city of Aquatint. It moves on from there. And this thing really, in a way, doesn't. I mean, there are times when it wants to sort of gesture in that direction. I don't know. I should read it again. I haven't read it since that blockbuster first appearance. Okay, this next one is The Waiting Years by Fumiko Enchi. A truly great Japanese novel. I don't know if it's still in print. No idea if it has. I think this was an old Tuttle or Kodansha mass market paperback that I haven't seen since I scanned this book. And it's the story of a housewife who is sent to run a household errand for her husband. And that errand is to oversee the procurement and addition of his next wife. Not her replacement, just another wife in the household. And it's amazing. It's amazing how subtle it is. It never beats you over the head with anything. You are drawn into the book and into the weird personal ramifications of that kind of social setup. You're drawn into that world before you really know that you are, so that you're really, it's a tremendous reading experience. I don't think I've read it in years, in decades, so I really should see if there's maybe a new translation that might bring out, maybe the book is even better than I originally thought. Maybe that old translation is creaky. Okay, then we have Elizabeth Wayne. This is The Winter Prince, with a great fantasy cover. I think that was all they could get, was that postage stamp illustration at the top. So they just gave it a great design all around. This is an Arthurian story, a sort of what-if Arthurian story. It's leans heavily on Mordred and Morgause, rather than King Arthur or Merlin or whatever. And it's a thin little thing, tiny thing, but well worth it. Especially if you're an Arthurian fan, it's well worth it to find an old copy of this thing. Then we have a book by John Franklin, a familiar kind of book. We've seen it many times before, both books on the shelf and books in the Library of the Lost. This is The Wolf in the Parlor, the eternal connection between humans and dogs. And this is all about that connection, that most amazing story in the history of life on Earth. This tens of thousands of years old partnership between two species. Throughout human history, humans have often, but not mostly, killed and eaten dogs for meat. They still do, they always have, but it's mostly been a working partnership, and also with often, going back in history as far as we can find it, affection. A team-up, in a way that humans have done with no other animal, and that as far as we know, no animal has ever done with any other kind of animal. And this book goes through that. I imagine that if I were to find a copy of this now, I would definitely grab it. But if I were to find a copy of this now, I imagine I would notice parts that have been updated. I'm pretty sure, for instance, that this book was written before the Canis Familiaris gene sequence was published. So I think this was. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that the gene sequence of every canid on Earth has now been mapped and published. So there'd be updates to this thing, definitely. But I remember it being very good on the speculation about why that partnership started in the first place. Very good about that. I've heard many, many theories along those lines. For instance, wolf puppies that are cute, so you take them, maybe you find a lost one or an abandoned one, or maybe they come around to your encampment because they smell food, and maybe they've wandered away from their parents. Maybe the parents realize that you're not killing them right away, that maybe there's a good advantage to following these weird, naked, upright creatures because they do seem to waste a lot of food. That is still true. That is absolutely still true. A troop of dogs, a troop of African hunting dogs or coyotes or whatever could live off what you throw out every week. So that is still true. Only now humans have sort of upped the ante because they now buy food for their dogs instead of just letting their dogs live off their remains. I've heard that. I think there's another very persuasive angle to that, which is that humans and dogs have a lot in common. One of the things they have in common in evolutionary deep time, not so much in the present, is a phenomenal ability to run great distances in the heat of the day. A phenomenal ability. You think about animals, other non-human animals out in the animal kingdom today, and you think running, you automatically think cheetah or gazelle, but they can't do it for long. They do it for bursts. They can't do it for long periods of time. They'll just die if they do. Same thing with chimpanzees. We're terrible at locomotion, long distance locomotion. Same thing with most animals other than canines. Canines tend to be really good at that. They have an enormous, outsized lung capacity. Most even breeds of domestic dogs retain that. Miniature schnauzers do not. They are a tubby little tube. But if you have a dog who's bigger than a beagle, take a look at that dog. Look for a minute with fresh eyes at how big that rib cage is compared to how big you would kind of think it would be. Compare the comparative size of if you have like a bigger dog, compare the comparative size of their rib cage to the proportionate size of the rib cage of your cat. There's no comparison at all. The dog, even some breeds of Canis familiaris, still retain the image of an animal that was clearly evolved to run long, long distances without collapsing and dying. And believe it or not, I know it's probably been a while since you went to the gym. Humans are also built that way. There's a reason why our hair protects the top of our head and not the rest of our body, because that's where the sun is hitting. And I've heard one theory that one of the cementing bonds in this age-old connection between humans and dogs is that dogs can do it even better. They can run, their center of gravity is lower, they have better muscle tissue, so they can run even longer. Which means if you wound a prey animal, you're using tools, the dog isn't using tools, but the dog is helping you. Maybe they herded the animal, maybe they've been worrying its flanks. You wound the animal runs off, but it's mortally wounded. It's going to run much faster than you can. It's going to run out of sight. Your dogs can chase it. And they can get to that site. When it finally collapses, they can defend that kill site against scavengers until you show up with your weapons. It's a very good partnership, and it works on every single level in the world. Which is why modern cognitive tests always show that dogs understand human body language and eye signals and whatnot better than young humans do. They're that good at it. The connection is that deep. Sorry for the digression. Of course, if you're going to get a digression from me, you're going to get it on this subject. But I would grab this book if I saw it again. Then we have a romance novel. Anne Mallory's novel, 3 Nights of Sin, which I admit I got for the Paul Marin cover. I try never to miss a cover with my boy Paul Marin on it. This is it's a really clever story. It's really well done about a young woman who has to defend her brother. He is accused of murder. I think he was accused of murder, and she desperately needs help. And all of the finer people in the world turn their backs on her for the social disgrace. She finds a young man who will take her case, but he has 3 favors to ask first. Always trouble in a romance novel. I don't think I have a copy of this at the moment. Okay, then we do something for the gays. You always got to have something for the gays. This is a novel. I don't think I've ever seen this again. This is by Juliet Sarkeesian, and it is Trio Sonata. And it's a woman who works at a restaurant. I think it's a Ukrainian restaurant, and she has a fascination with gay men. And it's not just an intellectual fascination. It's also a kind of quasi-erotic fascination. She meets a gay man and quickly realizes that you see the musical allusion in the title, and also a bit of a cello there. It turns out that the man that she meets and really likes is the boyfriend of a famous musician, of a brilliant musician. And a weird kind of trio forms in the course of this book. Very subtle, very smart, respects the reader's intelligence every step of the way. Not like most other gay novels that I've read. I wish I could find it again, give it a read. Okay, then we have a murder mystery. This is one in a series. This is Randy Wayne White, who's fantastic. These are Florida murder mysteries. They're kind of neo-noir, Florida noir murder mysteries. They're fantastically good. All of them are fantastically good. I think this was one of the last ones that the publisher brought out as a mass market paperback. That's the mass market paperback cover. If Randy Wayne White still exists, if all of his books are still in print, I am sure that they are trade paperbacks now that mass markets are long gone. But if you see a book by this author and you like kind of action-oriented crime noir that's beautifully written, that's really, really well done, it isn't going to matter which one you get. I've read this series out of order. You can too, and you will really like them. He's a good recommendation for that sort of thing because he's written a lot of books. Okay, then we have a book by Mark Del Franco called Unshapely Things. This is another example of that much maligned subgenre that I talked about during FFS, and that's urban fantasy. And I knew already by the time this book came out, this was a paperback original, I think. I knew already by the time this came out that I didn't really like urban fantasy, and I might have given this a miss. It's a normal plot kind of thing where the police are stumped and call in a druid. They call in someone who the magic runs right alongside the real world stuff. Except this is set in Boston. I think that's the reason that I grabbed it. And oddly enough, considering that, it's weird that I got rid of it. Unless maybe I read it and it was particularly bad. I don't think I remember reading it at all. And then I think this is the last one for today. Yeah, we'll do this one last. This is another fantasy novel. This is The Way of the Wolf, Book 1 of The Vampire Earth by E.E. Knight, in which Earth has been conquered by a vampire-like species for a long time. But there are ongoing persistent resistance cells. Our main hero is a young kid, a young dreamboat, who is a very effective member of one of those cells. And it's fantastic. This is just fantastic as a vampire novel. Just incredibly good. As a science fiction vampire novel, I urge you not to miss it. I'm sure that this book, the paperback, what is this, Rock? Yeah, the Rock paperback of this, I'm sure that it's 10 cents on eBay. Unless it's one of those ones that became weirdly collectible, and I don't have any prediction of that. But find a copy of this book and give it a try. You'll see right away, you'll get the sense that this was a heavily built, heavily imagined world. And really well done. And oh my, the action sequences, oh my. It's just a perfect example of how you do this. Which makes it odd, this particular book odd for two reasons. One is that I didn't keep this. And I've never seen this mass market again. I want the early 90s hairdo. I want this cover. And also odd that I don't think I've ever read any of the other books in this series. I just think I ever got around to it. I don't know why in either case. Don't know why I would get rid of this if I liked it so much. Don't know why I wouldn't go on in the series. But sooner or later, they will turn up. And I wanted to recommend this one to you anyway. You would love it. So there's a few recommendations here. If you are a fan of contemporary noir-esque murder mysteries and you haven't read Randy Wayne White, definitely do. Find his books and read them. You will love them. You'll have a new author to explore who has a huge backlog. And the same thing with this E.E. Knight book. so there you go. That'll wrap up the Library of the Lost for today. But I will continue tomorrow if I can. I have at the moment a high maintenance house guest. So video schedules are up in the air until they happen. But I will try my best. Thank you, BookTube.